It's a little worrisome.
Yeah, the fact that I thought it was just like, oh, there's like a case against him. There are three cases
No, there's quite a few.
of
Um,
fraud and bribery and
and I
breach
wouldn't be,
of trust.
and like, just slime bullshit.
In our lead story today, we're going to travel to Israel, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has found himself increasingly under political siege. Though war still rages in the Palestinian territory of Gaza, Netanyahu's challenges have increasingly come from the home front, as the PM's fragile hold on his political fortunes appears to be growing increasingly weaker. The trouble Netanyahu faces at home is not the sort of thing that's contained to a single misstep or an isolated crisis, but there is a distinct moment over the last couple of weeks when Netanyahu's already precarious situation went from bad to worse. That moment came on Sunday the 9th of June, when a major Israeli political leader named Benny Gantz resigned from Netanyahu's war cabinet. Gantz is a very high-profile figure in Israel and a career military man, and although he's widely considered to be Netanyahu's most potent political opponent, he spent months working alongside Netanyahu since shortly after the Hamas terror attacks of October the 7th, 2023. The war cabinet, consisting of Gantz, two other members, and a pair of advisors, had been one of Gantz's demands to Netanyahu at the start of the war, attempting to force the PM to moderate his decisions through a small decision-making body in order to counteract the influence of far-right parliamentarians on the PM. But in the weeks leading to his resignation, Gantz has expressed serious frustrations with Netanyahu, accusing him of drawing out the war against Hamas in order to avoid new elections in which he would likely lose his position and dodge a corruption trial that's waiting for him when he leaves office. Gantz demanded that Netanyahu endorse the comprehensive peace plan currently being pushed by America's Biden administration, or which we've written a separate episode about if you're curious. And when Netanyahu refused that, Gantz left the war cabinet alongside one of the two advisory members who also resigned. That advisory member, a former general and political moderate named Gadi Eisenkot, said in his own resignation address that the Israeli government, quote, had failed completely in every objective. Gantz's resignation created an empty seat on the war cabinet, one that immediately fell under the focus of one Itamar Ben-Gvir. He's Israel's Minister of National Security and the leader of a far-right, ultra-nationalist political party called Jewish Power.
I'm sorry, that guy looks like a cunt.
Ben-Gvir. Yeah.
He just looks like a seedy character. Maybe it's just the picture.
Oddly enough, that's actually not his full name. That's just his full surname. I forget what his first name is. Something Ben-Gvir. Oh. But it looks like his name is Ben.
And the leader of a far-right, ultra-nationalist political party called Jewish Power. He and his allies in Israel's far right have been a critical part of Netanyahu's current governing coalition, which most experts on Israeli politics regard as the furthest right-leaning coalition in the nation.
Well, because he's just smug.
Yet despite Ben-Gvir's power, he's a person Netanyahu has worked to keep at arm's length, wary of the degree to which Ben-Gvir and his allies will be able to strong-arm Netanyahu if the PM loses support from other political partners. Yeah, Netanyahu took a similar approach. 8 days after Gantz resigned from the war cabinet, Netanyahu announced that it would be dissolved rather than
Ben-Gvir's like the guy who
Ben-Gvir was
the whole West Bank. Like he's the sort of person that's pushing for more and more settlements to be built there. Like he's that level of crazy.
Okay, so he's like full on the Zionist. What would be
he's like Zionist on turbo, like turbo Zionist.
Yeah. Like full Zionism is the way, and these people need to be expelled from our land, type thing. Okay, well,
yeah.
So definitely a proponent of peace. It's good.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Love that for us.
Yeah.
Denied the post and denied leverage over the direction of the war, at least for the time being. Instead, Netanyahu informed his ministers that he would hold conversations with his own advisors in the government and present his decisions to the security-oriented members of the cabinet. Within Israel, the turn of events appears to have given Netanyahu greater latitude to continue the war in Gaza as he sees fit. That's something that Netanyahu is broadly understood as being incentivized to do, as both domestic and foreign observers within Israel increasingly agree with the perception Benny Gantz had voiced while resigning from the war cabinet, that Netanyahu is incentivized to prolong the war and seeks to do so in order to remain in power. But Gantz's departure and the resulting political shakeup have meant that political moderates in the government have moved away from the PM, unbalancing his political coalition and making his political survival all the more dependent on those same far-right elements that Netanyahu seemingly wanted to keep away from the war cabinet. This sequence of events doesn't grant Ben-Gvir and his allies the same direct leverage that they would have gotten with a war cabinet appointment, but it increases their sway over Israel's government in a much broader way. With that influence, a successful set of ceasefire negotiations seems less and less likely, while voices advocating an even more devastating wartime strategy and a potential long-term reoccupation of Gaza get significantly more powerful. Ben-Gvir, along with Finance Minister and religious Zionist party leader Bezalel Smotrich, have threatened to bring down the whole government if Israel proceeds in negotiating a ceasefire, something that Netanyahu
these guys are
now
wild.
appears loath to do. But
What? If they even try and negotiate a ceasefire?
Yeah, dude, they're next level.
That's so hawkish. That's like full-on hawkish.
These guys, I mean, sure, they probably have all their reasons and whatever, but if you want to talk about like the proper threat to like peace as well, on the Israeli side, this is where it comes from, this element of Israel.
Yeah.
For a second, you know?
Yeah, my God.
ceasefire, something that Netanyahu now appears loath to do. But the collapse of Netanyahu's war cabinet wasn't the only problem that the PM faced in recent days, far from it. On Sunday, the 16th of June, the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, made an announcement of a new policy in southern Gaza. Per the IDF, the military would enact a so-called tactical pause each day for the foreseeable future across a stretch of about 12 kilometers, that's 7.4 miles of road in the area in and around the city of Rafah. Across Rafah, intense fighting has seen the IDF hunt down and attempt to destroy the few remaining organized brigades of Hamas fighters that has led to yet another worsening of the humanitarian crisis that has already brought Gaza to the brink. Per the IDF, the daily pauses would last from 8 in the morning to 7 at night local time in order to allow mass amounts of humanitarian aid into the territory after it had been delayed and backlogged for weeks. It's a much-needed step taken to enable aid trucks to utilize the critical Kerem Shalom crossing and address imminent starvation, intense malnutrition, and shortages of medical supplies, water, and other critical goods in Gaza. While the IDF was quite clear that this change would not amount to a ceasefire or even a stop in daily fighting, it was still a desperately needed relief valve, especially as Palestinians and Muslims around the world celebrate the holy days of Eid al-Adha. For anyone interested in seeing humanitarian aid finally flowing into Gaza, the IDF's pause was welcome news. Not enough to alleviate the worst of the starvation across the territory, but certainly enough to make an impact. The only trouble with that was that it apparently was announced and decided on without Netanyahu's approval. Quoting an unnamed Israeli source via several media organizations, quote, "When the Prime Minister heard the reports of an 11-hour humanitarian pause in the morning, he turned to his military secretary and made it clear that this was unacceptable to him." Apparently, Netanyahu was assured by military leaders that the IDF's policy had not actually changed and that, quote, "fighting in Rafah continues as planned." But Netanyahu was clearly put off by the decision. As he was quoted saying to Israeli media later that day, "We have a country with an army, not an army with a country." The move fell under intense fire from Netanyahu's far-right allies, with the aforementioned Itamar Ben-Gvir calling for the firing of whomever ordered the daily pause. Although it does not appear to extend directly into Rafah and instead opens a humanitarian line of support on the periphery of the city, it still drew the ire of pro-war factions incensed at the idea of a pause. Making matters worse, it was announced one day after the deaths of 8 Israeli soldiers in an armored carrier in the same part of Gaza, and as news of Hamas tunnels from Rafah to Egypt and the militant terror group's persistent use of civilian targets to hide their military infrastructure stream out of the city from the Israeli side. At the time of writing, it appears the daily pause has yet to be cancelled by Netanyahu's administration, although how long it may persist is yet unknown. Just days prior to the IDF's tactical pause, Netanyahu received even more bad news, in the form of an interview by Hamas spokesman that since heightened fears within Israel around over 100 hostages still held captive by Hamas. The interview aired on Thursday, the 13th of June, where Hamas spokesman Osama Hamdan was asked by a CNN reporter how many hostages were still alive in Gaza. The response: "I don't have any idea about that. No one has any idea about that." The statement lit yet another spark of discontent within Israel, where the government still enjoys broad popular support in waging war against Hamas, but a bitter and growing protest movement has heavily criticized Netanyahu for not doing enough to bring the hostages home.
Low-key, I think that might be the case.
I'm serious. Like, there's been so many, like, especially when there was this one time where they were mentioning that we were going to have a ceasefire, and one of the terms was they'd have a hostage exchange. And I might be wrong, but I remembered Hamas saying, well, we'll exchange hostages that we have dead or alive. It's like,
like
okay, that's not promising.
Find Israeli airstrikes have killed a fair number of hostages.
It's probably the case
and
too.
The ones that are like left over, are like close to high-ranking Hamas officials.
Yeah, or the ones they have left over are close to like high level or VIP sort of Israeli hostages that they have.
Yeah, that's.
I think it's a very grim assessment, but it's probably the case.
Yeah, it's impossible to know until actual information comes out years from now.
Yeah.
Enjoys broad popular support in waging war against Hamas, but a bitter and growing protest movement has heavily criticized Netanyahu for not doing enough to bring the hostages home. Days before that interview aired, Israel did recover 4 hostages from Gaza, but during that recovery operation, at least 274 Gazans were killed, including 64 children and 57 women, per the Gaza Health Ministry and Gaza's media office, with around 700 wounded. Per the IDF, Hamas did offer fierce resistance, but per a wide range of sources, the death toll far exceeded the Hamas fighters' presence. Not only did the surrounding civilians come under fire from Israeli Special Force commandos, but many were killed when a barrage of Hellfire missiles tore into nearby crowds during the daytime raid, clearing a bloody path for Special Forces to withdraw with the hostages. At present, Israel estimates that at least a third of the remaining 120 or so hostages have died in captivity, and with even Hamas now stating that it has been unable to keep track of the hostages, the idea that Israel could track the survivors down in time now appears even harder to accomplish via military means. Over 100 hostages have been freed via diplomacy, and just 7 so far by the IDF's military operations. All the while, Israel has come under much increased pressure from foreign allies, foremost among them the United States. After months essentially providing Israel carte blanche cover to pursue its offensive, the US has begun to make more stringent demands of its ally, pushing toward that same comprehensive ceasefire that we referenced a moment ago. America has taken its concerns to the UN Security Council, where a full-throated endorsement of that ceasefire was agreed on by 14 out of 15 members and passed with an abstention from Russia. Europe continues to hold Netanyahu at a further and further length, while the nations of the continent continue to consider their options after Ireland, Norway, and Spain recognized Palestinian statehood last month. In advance, what promises to be a complicated and messy
getting a little serious about this.
They've
recognized Palestinian statehood.
At least those countries have. Remember, Spain, those countries are quite left-leaning. But it's a big thing for a European country to just outright
to
say,
recognize
fuck,
that,
dude.
yeah.
And this is more of a solidarity thing with what's happening to the people in Gaza, and it's when you see Europe starting to like pull back and America starting to pull back and be like, yo, bro.
It's great. Israel is isolating itself more and more.
Yeah, it's the moral rabbit hole. Yeah. They're just spiraling.
Yeah.
Month. In advance of what promises to be a complicated and messy Paris Olympics, Israel's position around the world continues to move toward isolation as the slow winnowing. In our lead story today, we're going to travel to Israel carte blanche cover to pursue its offensive, the US has begun to make more stringent demands of its ally, pushing toward that same comprehensive ceasefire that we referenced a moment ago. America has taken its concerns to the UN Security Council, where a full-throated endorsement of that ceasefire was agreed on by 14 out of 15 members and passed with an abstention from Russia. Europe continues to hold Netanyahu at a further and further length, while the nations of the continent continue to consider their options after Ireland, Norway, and Spain recognized Palestinian statehood last month.
That helps the United States current administration doesn't serve their interests.
Israel's position around the world continues to move toward isolation, as the slow winnowing away of popular support for the IDF's war effort makes it more and more difficult for national leaders to continue endorsing the same sorts of near unconditional partnerships that many nations have shared with Israel for generations. And finally, one more fearsome specter looms over the Netanyahu administration. the prospect of yet more violence north of Israel's own territory, fighting against the Lebanese militant organization Hezbollah.
Yeah, what the fuck is that,
supported, entrenched in the Lebanese government and greater in numbers than the Hamas organization, Hezbollah nonetheless shares close ties to Hamas, linked together as critical parts of Iran's broader network of influence in the region. Hezbollah and Israel have traded bullets and bombarded each other with rockets and airstrikes nearly daily since the start of the Israel-Hamas war, but beginning on the 12th of June, Hezbollah has shown a far greater willingness to attack Israeli installations en masse. The prior day, Israel had killed a Hezbollah field commander in southern Lebanon, and on that Wednesday, Hezbollah fired over 200 rockets and other projectiles across the Israeli border in retaliation. The following day, they launched over 100 more, including attacks on specific Israeli military installations and a multi-drone assault on Israel's northern military headquarters. The 2 days represented Hezbollah's most serious attack on Israel since the Israel-Hamas war began, and while Israeli air defenses were able to ensure no casualties on the Israeli side, wildfires broke out on either side of the border, while Israeli strikes killed several in the Lebanese town of Janata. For outside observers, seeing Israel's struggles in placating its hostages and dismantling Hamas, the idea that Netanyahu would open another front in this war might be surprising, but this is a cycle of escalation the world has been waiting for the last several months. Despite Hezbollah's political role in the Lebanese government and their broad base of support in the southern part of the country, they are seen as a legitimate military target for Israel, and with Israel's 3 historic invasions of Lebanon all going basically to plan, it's far from inconceivable that Netanyahu and company would seek to push their forces northward in a larger assault. Indeed, the 19th of June saw Israel's foreign affairs minister, a man named Israel Katz, warn of an all-out war with Hezbollah after Hezbollah had published videos of its attacks on sensitive Israeli military outposts. Quoting Katz on social media platform X, "In our all-out war, Hezbollah will be destroyed and Lebanon will be severely hit. The state of Israel will pay a price on the front and home fronts, but with a strong and united nation and the full power of the IDF, we will restore security to the residents of the north." Making matters worse, Israel is eager to return some 80,000 displaced residents to northern districts where they've been forced to flee by Hezbollah rocket attacks, and it's widely understood that the objective will be hard, if not impossible, to achieve without broader military action to at least push Hezbollah out. So, that's the Israeli PM's situation, squeezed from all sides and taking steps that relieve the pressure, but make a longer conflict all the more likely. Netanyahu does have increased latitude to pursue an extended attritional war and occupation in Gaza, if indeed that's what he seeks to accomplish. He can track down hostages at the same rate that's seen Israel return fewer than 1 per month via military means, a pace that would imply a war of over a decade if that rate of recovery holds steady. He can even extend his war to Hezbollah in the north, opening another round of bitter violence and ensuring that he's shrouded in the protection of his wartime powers. But with moderate partners now abandoning his coalition, Netanyahu is left with fewer and fewer off-ramps from the war and significantly reduced means to moderate his nation's conduct as that war continues. In the short term, he protects his position, guarding against elections at a time when some 3 out of 4 Israelis believe that he should be ousted from his position. But in the long term, he signs up for a long war that has seen Israel move towards pariah status on the world stage, overseeing an incredible amount of wartime atrocities, and may well make his domestic political situation worse when the war either ends or there's nothing left of Gaza to wage war against. If Netanyahu seriously intends to leave...
I mean, like, what's the point of just holding on to power for power's sake? Like,
well, I mean...
Like the theory of man is extending the war to hold on to power. Like, if the war goes on for a year, let's say, heaven forbid, he's still going to get to the end of that war, and it's going to be even worse.
Yeah, he's kind of kicking the can down the road, essentially. Now, that's what it appears to be on the outset, but like, who knows what's going on in the government? What sort of political games, or because the party itself in the Knesset is a coalition between his party, which is Netanyahu's party, and the more right-wing party, and he needs that party to govern. So, honestly, I think Netanyahu is a crook, to be quite fair, and it doesn't help Israel's cause to have like such highly strung people in power.
I mean, a crook, how so? As in, like,
Well, like
corruption?
his
Or
corruption charges that have been laid against him.
I haven't
And there's
seen
also
anything about those. To be fair, I haven't looked it
there's
up. So
he's pending an investigation on that. I think I think I think the dude referenced that in his video that
yeah, he mentioned
those
it.
charges are waiting for him. Those are now. I have a feeling he's kind of like a Trumpian sort of guy as well. Not too afraid to skirt the bounds of, like, the government's legal system to get what he wants, or what they did with the judicial system, trying to like exclude the Supreme Court from Parliament or whatever the case was then. It's some dictatorial weird shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Netanyahu
Look,
corruption trial resumes. This is a year ago. But
yeah, it's a long-going process. I think this was from long ago, from before.
First trial first began in January 2020.
Yeah, long before this started.
Charges of fraud, breach of trust, and bribery.
Honestly, like I wouldn't be. I'm not. I wouldn't outright say he's a crook, but I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out he is one.
Yeah. In case 1000, he is charged with fraud and breach of trust in the connection with allegations that he received gifts like cigars and champagne, from overseas businessmen. In case 2000, he's also charged with fraud and breach of trust, and is accused of seeking favorable coverage in one of Israel's top newspapers in exchange for limiting the circulation of one of the paper's main rivals. Oh, hectic.
Yo.
Okay.
That's
quite an allegation.
That's some heavy shit right there. And to be fair, when you say, "Oh well, he just took cigars," yeah, it is literally 100%. But like you can say, "Oh well, he only took some cigars or whatever," bro. That's literally bribery. Like, that means that he can be bought.
And these are three separate cases. So
exactly,
one's a bribery charge. The other is a state, what will be media, not media coercion. Would that be it?
It's media suppression.
Yeah. And then the most serious case 4000, he is charged with bribery, fraud, and breach of trust for allegedly advancing regulatory benefits worth the equivalent of more than $250 million at the time when his friend, Shaul Olvich?
Something like that.
Shaul Olvich, who was the controlling shareholder of the telecoms company Bezek.
Yeah, it's a little sussy-wussy, bro. Sussy bucker.
I mean, just looking at images of this guy doesn't fill me with confidence.
Yeah.
Look at this shit.
God looks like he just came off like a fucking 3-day drinking binge.
Yeah, dude. The amount of cocaine that goes through that man's nose.
Fuck, bro. These are shady characters. Listen, like, while these guys are in government and they're pretty high up there, there are a lot of factors of the Israeli government that are super against this shit, like the main opposition party. It's not like all of Israel's just corrupt and begging for, bloodshed or whatever. But it sucks when those elements happen to be in the most senior positions of power. It's a little indefensible.
Yeah, I mean,
Netanyahu's not helping in any way. He's in no way someone who's trying to find a peace solution.
Which is the problem, Joe Biden out, which is a massive issue.
It's a huge issue. And I keep worrying, dude, and this is why the US elections are fucking freaky, is you take Joe Biden's administration out of the equation and you replace it with a Trump administration, and Israel's just gonna have free reign, bro. US is gonna just come right back in, and go harder. And I don't even want to talk about the Ukraine situation.
So essentially, yeah, the worst charge is providing regulatory benefits to a specific friend. In return, the prosecution says Aldrich ensured positive coverage of the Prime Minister in online news sites he owned called Walla News. That's the same. Walla, yeah. So 4000 and case 4000 and case 2000 are effectively the same thing. One is suppression of negative news about you, and the other is
trying to push positive news on the
propaganda.
other side. Yeah. Oh, that's literally it. It's basically just, trying to get propaganda out there more and more, make it like state sanctioned.
Yeah. That's wild.
It's pretty gross, one might say. Yeah. I don't know. It's a little worrisome.
Yeah, the fact that I thought it was just like, there's like a case against him. There are 3 cases.
No, there's quite a few.
Of fraud and bribery and breach of trust.
And just slime bullshit.
And these are, it's almost like, it's like how I feel with Trump. It's like,
100%.
If you have a single case against you, okay, cool. But if you have multiple cases against you,
with multiple charges,
what is the other shit that you haven't been caught?
Yeah, exactly. That's the scary part.
What have you been doing that you've not been caught doing?
America might just be on the cusp of electing a fucking criminal president, like a guy who's literally been.
Well, he has been convicted
of 34 felony accounts.
Yes.
Yeah, he's literally a fucking felon, bro. It's about fucking time too, because we knew this was coming eventually. It took fucking 8 years to get us here, but we finally made it.
Felony president.
Yeah, what a meme
nothing
that
left
would
of
be.
Gaza to wage war against. If Netanyahu seriously intends to lead Israel until his eventual demise, and he can make such a thing happen, then perhaps he may avoid the consequences that he seems to fear by ending his time in office. But in all likelihood, Netanyahu will have to step down sooner or later, and the decisions he and his coalition make today are likely to only make the consequences worse in the long run. Higher consequences later, it stands to reason.
That's literally what we just said, pre-watched.
To only make
for me, the stream stopped for some reason.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, hold on, let me just go back. Give me a sec.
I'm restreaming.
Okay.
Down sooner or by end and make such who or either ends, or there's nothing left of Gaza to wage war against. If Netanyahu seriously intends to lead Israel until his eventual demise, and he can make such a thing happen, then perhaps he may avoid the consequences that he seems to fear by ending his time in office. But in all likelihood, Netanyahu will have to step down sooner or later, and the decisions he and his coalition make today are likely to only make the consequences worse in the long run. Higher consequences later, it stands to reason, will lead to greater desperation in the months and years to come, and a desperate leader waging such a brutal war on a people that broadly lack the means to defend themselves is a recipe for a far worse sort of disaster.
Yep.